Right, yes, good evening, everyone. So yes, thank you for all joining us today. It was an honour to be invited to talk to you a little bit today about continuing healthcare. I'll go through some introductions in a second. Glad that we've all, well, I say we've not had too many problems with the weather tonight as well. You know, my lights have flickered a couple of times this evening, so fingers crossed I'm still here within the next hour or two. So yeah, but yeah, it's another horrible stormy night, and what better to be doing than listening to me prattling on about continuing healthcare for a couple of hours. So yes, so as Pippa was saying, if you've got any questions, just pop them in the chat box. We are planning on having a bit of a Q&A session towards the end. I'm going to try and put some breaks in this as well. Some of you may or may not know, continuing healthcare is a pretty dry subject, for the most part at times, and it can be quite long and convoluted and things like that. So just to give us all a bit of a break, I will be stopping where I can. I'll see how the time goes anyway, and yeah, we'll have some stops for comfort breaks and to get a drink, top up wine glasses and things like that by the looks of it. So that's absolutely fine. So right, so we'll crack straight on with it. So first of all, just some introductions. So my name is Chris Blease. I am the Information and Advice Service Team Leader and Senior Advisor at Beacon Continuing Healthcare. I've worked in continuing healthcare for, 8 years now? 7-8 years now. I began working in continuing healthcare actually at a CCG back in 2013. At that point, I was a business, well, in the end, I was a business and administration lead for a CCG in West Yorkshire. So I left there in 2016 and started working for Beacon and been there ever since. Yeah, that's a summary of me. Tonight I'll also be presenting with Joanna, who's on the call now, and I'll let her introduce herself as well.
Okay, hello everyone. I can't actually see people at the moment as people have joined. I can't see people, but I can hear you all perfectly well. So
are you on mute? Yes.
Can everyone hear me okay?
We can hear you, Joe, that's fine, yeah.
Perfect. Okay, so I've been nursing for more years than, well, I've given you an estimate of about 30, so that's my background. I come from a nursing background. I'm married to a Frenchman, so after a good long time nursing, we went off to France to live for about 7 years, and then came back to look after my elderly mum. And when I came back, I thought, no, I won't go back into the wards and the hassle of acute hospitals. So I found there was a job going at Beacon. So I've been working for them since 2018, firstly as a kind of general advisor on the advice line, and after a year I moved up to the more specialist advice service. So that's me.
Thanks, Joe. So just a little bit about Beacon as well. Come on, slides, please move. There we go. So Beacon is a social enterprise. We're a national social enterprise. We formed out of a project run by Age UK Oxfordshire. We formed in 2014 as an independent organisation. Since then, we've provided well over 50,000 advice sessions to over 37,000 people in 7 years. So it's been an expanding period, very much. We get busier every single year as continuing healthcare becomes more of a known issue, often referred to as the NHS's biggest secrets, but yeah, it becomes more and more of an issue, more of a known issue over time. So we have expanded quite rapidly over time, and we're continuing to expand even today. So since 2015, we've run the official national CHC information and advice service, which is what Joe and I are a part of, and I lead on. The National Advice Service is actually commissioned by NHS England as part of their responsibility to provide independent advice on continuing healthcare and ensure that people have got access to that information. Other side of Beacon as well, we do offer casework and advocacy services on a paid basis. Can't stress this enough. We are not in any way a legal firm. We offer it from a lay perspective to a certain extent. All members of staff are experts, within continuing healthcare. And we do have some mental health and social care professionals, Joe being one of them, of course. And yes, it's a varied team. We're still a relatively small organization by all accounts. We're by no means a massive national charity, the likes of Age UK. We have one office based out of Abingdon in Oxfordshire. Not that we've been there for 2 years, I think, is it now, Joe? We're coming up for 2 years. We've not been in the office.
Yes, it is nearly 2 years.
But that's COVID for you. So yes, so it's a strange time, but we've adapted over time. So outside of our core work, which, as I say, is our national information advice service and the advocacy we provide to individuals working their way and navigating their way through continuing healthcare, we also do a lot of campaigning work. We do a lot of work within the Continuing Healthcare Alliance, which is along with our partner charities as well. So the likes of Age UK and Parkinson's UK, Alzheimer's Society. I should probably know them all off by heart, but yeah, they've completely gone from my mind. But those are the main players anyway. We've done a lot of feeding back into, say, the National Audit Office investigation, parliamentary reviews. We were quite instrumental in the drafting of the 2018 national framework as well. We ran a lot of focus groups on behalf of NHS England at that time. So we did a lot of work in Whitehall at that time as well. So, the influence has been quite good and quite widespread in that time. So we do a lot of work outside of our core work as well. So yeah. As I say, we offer the National Information Advice Service. So that's includes a Tier 1 information and advice service. This is what you would get if you were to phone us. You would initially get the basic information, the overview of continuing healthcare over the phone or via email, however you wish to contact us. I'll give some more details at the end should anyone need to for more information. So we do offer that information and advice service to begin with on a 2-tier basis, as I say, the first tier being the basic information and advice. After that, if people are requiring more in-depth advice, wanting to speak about specific issues, in relation to any aspect of continuing healthcare, including assessment, appeal, care planning and processes, then we also offer 90 minutes of free information and advice with a specialist advisor, namely me and Joe. So we do also offer comprehensive written guidance as well. We have what's called our navigational toolkits, and that's available for free. It's a one-stop guide to continuing healthcare, you could put it that way. It's lots of people find it very, very useful. It covers all aspects of continuing healthcare in some degree of detail to a certain extent. And that's supplemented as well with the online information that we offer as well. So we do have quite a comprehensive website where you get on news and updates, any significant changes to health and social care, anything that's in the press about continuing healthcare we'll normally talk about on there as well. For more condition-specific and issue-specific support, we do get a lot of information and advice from our trusted partners within the Continuing Healthcare Alliance. And if it's a little bit out of our range as well, we will also refer you on to other organisations that may be able to help as well. So, for people with terminal conditions, we might refer you to Marie Curie. Say for benefits advice, we would always, we often send you to Age UK, depending if that was the right age group. For the likes of dementia, it might be the Alzheimer's Society, and for learning disabilities, we might refer you to the likes of MenCap, for instance. So, okay, so that's a bit of an overview of who we are, what we do. I won't take up too much time with that anymore, so we're on tooting our own horns. So aims and objectives of today. So this is just a bit of an overview of what we're going to go through today. Now, I appreciate we will have different people from different backgrounds, different experience with continuing healthcare. Some, might have been through it before. Others might not have heard of it before. I appreciate there's going to be a wide scope here. So I'm going to try and cover a bit of everything, which means I might not go into lots and lots of detail about the area you probably want to talk about. But as I say, we've got a Q&A session towards the end, which if you've got any particular questions you're wanting me to go into more detail on, then, as I say, feel free to ask the questions at that point. So aims and objectives today is to develop an understanding of the whole continuing healthcare process and what to expect at each stage, going from pre-assessment all the way through assessment to care planning and even reviews as well. It's to understand the principles at each stage and the rights of the individual or their representative, and to understand some of the practicalities of navigating the CHC system. So I don't want this to become a dry and boring talk about legal backgrounds and principles and things like that. It's also needs to be practical, for people who are actually wanting to use it. So I'm going to try and put some of that in there as well. Unfortunately, to get there, you often need to know the dry and boring bits and the guidance and the legal background. So we will cover it all, but yeah, I'm hoping we'll get some of the practicalities in there as well. Another thing to be thinking about as well is some of the key areas of the national framework for continuing healthcare as well. So for those that don't know, the continuing healthcare is governed by a national framework. It's the statutory guidance on continuing healthcare that needs to be followed in order for it to be carried out correctly. It is not a legal document, but it is enshrined within law. The standing rules and regulations on continuing healthcare states that it does have to be. They do have to have regard to the national framework. So it's often quoted as not being a legal document, but it is a document enshrined within law. So throughout the presentation, I will be quoting from it, hopefully not too heavily, but just some of the key areas, the most useful areas. Where we do, you will see I will put the number of the relevant paragraph in red. So if you're going through and you think, oh, that's really relevant to what I need to talk about, that is exactly what I needed to know, you just jot down the paragraph. And as I say, the national framework, it's publicly available documents. All you need to do is search for National Framework for Continuing Healthcare on Google. Very, very easy to find, and that will tell you the exact paragraph number. So, okay, so we're going to start off with a bit of an exercise. Mythbusters CHC edition. I didn't have the rights for the theme music, unfortunately, but I'll do my best anyway. So as I say, some of you will have some experience of continuing healthcare. Some of you might have a lot of experience with continuing healthcare. Some of you may have very little. Now, this isn't a test. It's not a quiz or anything like that. There's no beer vouchers on offer for the winner or anything like that, unfortunately. So it's purely just to look at some of the myths that we see around continuing healthcare, because you'd be surprised how many myths there are. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through some of these questions. Joe and I are going to take it in turns, so you're not just listening to me talking constantly. And what I want you to do is, they're true or false questions. And I just want you to put in the chat box whether or not you think it's true or false. So there's a few statements here which we'll whiz through quite quickly. So first one, I'll start, Joe, and then you can do the next one if that's all right.
Sure.
Okay. First one, continuing healthcare can only be provided in a care home with nursing. Seen lots of falses on the chat. Not going to give the answer away just yet, so I'll give it a second. Okay. Absolutely false. So CHC can be provided in any setting, including nursing, residential, and domiciliary care, so care at home. So yep, there is no requirement on care, continuing healthcare, to be delivered in any one particular area. In any one particular setting, it can be delivered anywhere. You'd be surprised how many people think the reverse of that, though. So well done, everyone in chat. I don't think I saw any trues. I think they were all falses. So well done, everyone. Right. Joe.
Okay, so we're going on to the next one, which is, if you become eligible for continuing healthcare, the NHS will be responsible for the full cost of your accommodation as well as your care fees. So do you think that is true or false? So is the NHS responsible for the full cost, including your accommodation? What have we got coming up here? Okay, I'm not sure if I can.
So we've got a lot of falses, Joe. I think there's one true. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Well, you'll be interested to know that the answer to this one is that is absolutely a true statement. If you do become eligible for continuing healthcare and accommodation is required to deliver that care that you need, then the NHS must pay for your accommodation as well as your care fees.
So one exception to that as well would be obviously mortgage and rent payments are not, so someone's just asked that, is that in a private home? No, not within a private home, but if it is part of the overall care package, so if it's within a care home, for instance, or a nursing home, specialist placements, then yes, they would have to cover the full cost of the care fees. So as you'll see, there's a little bit of an asterisk there. So it's, there is it's a slightly tricky question. It's a trick question. Yep, supported living. Yep, absolutely. So if that's included as part of the overall care package, then yeah, absolutely. So, okay, next one. So the CCG is allowed to impose a capped rate for the amount it is prepared to spend on any one care package. Individuals are then able to top up their care package in order to go into a more expensive care home. True or false? We seem to have divided the room a bit with that one. So yeah, lots of trues, but yes, some falses there as well. Okay, interesting. Yeah, okay. Answer there is false. No. So CCGs are not allowed to impose a cap rate for the amount it's prepared to spend. So for people eligible for continuing healthcare, the CCG must pay the full cost of supporting an individual's assessed care needs. They cannot allow a top up to develop. Not allowed a top up to be used to in order to meet that care package, to be able to meet those needs. There are some exceptions to this as well. So once again, it might be a little bit of a trick question, but this is something we'll go through later when we're talking about the care planning commissioning, towards the end. So, okay.
Okay, and the next question, and this is something we do hear quite often. The person has to be on their deathbed to be awarded continuing healthcare. Is continuing healthcare about end of life care? Does a person have to be at end of life? Is that true or false? Coming up. False,
Lots of falses here. I don't think I've seen a single true.
Yeah. No, can't see any trees coming up. You're absolutely right. That is false. We do hear a lot about it. It's quite often something we hear on the helpline, that somebody's having a problem getting a continuing healthcare assessment started off because they're told, no, you wouldn't be eligible. Your relative has to be kind of on their deathbed or at end of life. Absolutely false.
So, next one, I think this might be last one as well. So eligibility for continuing healthcare is not based upon diagnosis. True or false? Lots of trues there. That's good. Yep. Absolutely. Yep. So eligibility for continuing healthcare is absolutely not based upon diagnosis. So whilst diagnosis may inform the care needs and how they're assessed and how they're met, they don't directly relate to the eligibility of a person. So it cannot be determined based on someone's diagnosis whether or not they are eligible or whether or not they're likely to be eligible for continuing healthcare. So yeah, absolutely. Good. Well done, everyone. That was yeah, that's good. So hopefully we've busted some myths there. So hopefully we've challenged some misconceptions there. Just to say, if you did have misconceptions there, that is absolutely nothing to be ashamed of. That is, I came into working for Beacon with misconceptions, and I worked for a CCG and a continuing healthcare team. There is a lot of misconceptions about continuing healthcare out there. And I think one of the big things we want to do with this presentation today is to make sure you're not falling for those misconceptions. You're not falling for the myths around continuing healthcare, because you would be surprised by how many of those myths are not just propagated by individuals going through the process, but professionals involved in the process as well, and including GPs, specialists, social workers, continuing healthcare assessors, all sorts. So yeah. Right, so what is continuing healthcare? So I will read this out to you. This, once again, this is from the National Framework. So NHS continuing healthcare means a package of ongoing care that is arranged and funded solely by the National Health Service, where the individual has been assessed and found to have a primary health need as set out in the National Framework. Such care is provided to an individual aged 18 or over to meet health and associated social care needs that have arisen as a result of a disability, accident, or illness. So I'm going to pick up on a few keywords there. So first things first, primary health need, and this is something we're going to be talking about in a little bit more detail now. So the criteria for being eligible is the presence of a primary health need. It's a complicated term to come across, and it is not a singular term, so it's not a single need. It is a collection of needs, just to be extra confusing there. As I said, it's for people aged 18 or over, so it's for adults. There is, I'm sure many of you will be aware of this, so there is, a separate system in place for children. So it's children's continuing care, which has a different set of guidance, different set of processes. But for people for children moving into adults continuing healthcare, there is a transition process. We're not really going to cover that today, unfortunately, as it's kind of complicated in its own right to a certain extent. I mean, we can discuss it maybe in the Q&A a little bit later, but a lot of the principles here apply anyways. So continuing healthcare is the responsibility of the relevant NHS clinical commissioning groups, or CCG. Now, the clinical commissioning groups, I used to know how many there were across England. Unfortunately, they keep on merging into super CCGs, so I can't remember what the exact figure is. It used to be in over 150, I think, off the top of my head. I think we're now down to about 80 or so. So yes, there are a lot of CCGs. It's based upon which CCG it is based upon your GP registration. So your GP is part of the clinical commissioning group. So a primary health need. This is what it's all about. And the National Framework states very clearly, I say very clearly, an individual has a primary health need if, having taken account of all their needs following the completion of a decision support tool, it can be said that the main aspect or majority part of their care they require is focused in on addressing and or preventing health needs. Having a primary health need is not about the reason why an individual requires care or support, nor is it based upon their diagnosis. It is about the level and type of their overall actual day-to-day care needs taken in their totality. So I always see explaining continuing healthcare as a bit of peeling back an onion. There's several layers within this. So first of all is, well, what's continuing healthcare? Well, continuing healthcare is about primary health need. Well, what's a primary health need? A primary health need is about healthcare needs and social care needs, and then this is what it's about addressing. So what we're going to do is, as I say, we will go through this, and as I say, we will kind of peel back the layers a little bit as we go along. So what they're trying to identify in terms of a primary health need is very basically looking at the balance between health and social care. So on the one hand, you've got healthcare, which would be the responsibility of the NHS, and you've got social care, which is the responsibility of the local authority. How this is distinguished, as I say, within this is looking at the individual's healthcare needs and the individual's social care needs. So in terms of health needs, in general terms, it can be said that a health need is one related to the treatment, control, management, or prevention of a disease, illness, injury, or disability, and the care or aftercare of a person with these needs, whether or not the tasks involved have to be carried out by a health professional. So we'll kind of come on to that final point a little bit later. So it's looking at managing, treating, or preventing health conditions. Now, a health condition is not necessarily a single diagnosis as such when you're looking at the in-depth of an assessment. It's not just looking about an individual's overall diagnosis. Often the health conditions will come out of the diagnosis itself, so they will arise as a result of that diagnosis. So So social care needs. So social care needs are, to put it very basically, is about managing the aspects of daily living. So very basically, it's the things that people have to do for themselves on a day-to-day basis, but some people need more help with. Now, social care needs previously were always very loosely defined, which wasn't very helpful. But then we got the 2014 Care Act, which was incredibly useful because they then listed them. So when the 2018 National Framework came in as well, and that was updated in 2018, that went within the framework as well. So within the framework and within the Care Act as well, social care needs can be taken as related to the following Care Act criteria. So managing and maintaining nutrition, maintaining personal hygiene, managing toilet needs, being appropriately clothed, being able to make use of the home safely, maintaining a habitable home environment, developing and maintaining family or other personal relationships, accessing and engaging in work, training, education or volunteering, making use of necessary facilities or services in the local community, including public transport and recreational facilities or services, and carrying out any caring responsibilities the adult has for a child. So those are healthcare needs and social care needs, very basically. So what an assessment is doing is trying to address the balance between the two. Very simply, that's what it is. It's looking at the individual's healthcare needs compared against their social care needs. It is more complicated than that, and we'll get into it, but as a very basic introduction, that's what they're looking at. So within this, you've got a kind of sliding scale. So as a person's health needs increase, the further the responsibility goes from social care funding all the way up to continuing healthcare funding, which is the NHS's responsibility. You'll see within the middle there, you've got joint packages of care, which we'll touch upon a little bit. So the very purpose of continuing healthcare, very basically, is looking at the lawful responsibility. Where is the lawful responsibility within all of this? So as I say, the NHS has a responsibility for healthcare. The local authority has a responsibility for social care. The purpose of an assessment for continuing healthcare is to ensure that the person's needs are not above and beyond what social services can be legally responsible for. There is an upper limit on what social services can provide. Now, within the NHS, there isn't an upper limit on what can be provided. There is no upper limit. When someone becomes eligible for continuing healthcare, they also have, not only do they have their healthcare needs met, but they also have their social care needs met as well. Joint packages of care are for individuals who may not be fully eligible for continuing healthcare. So they don't have a primary health need. Their need is not primarily for health, but they do have some health needs which cannot be managed by social services. So there are certain services that are prohibited. The most obvious and easy to explain example is nursing care. So the local authority cannot be responsible for the management or employment or funding of nurses, or nursing care. So for instance, if someone was cared for at home, they required a regular access to a nurse, and that can be for all sorts of reasons. So it could be something, let's say, a peg feed, for instance, peg feed care. It could be a specialist dressing regime and things like that. Now, normally those services might be provided by a district nurse, which is obviously already funded by the NHS. However, if for whatever reason that wasn't available, due to capacity or due to the time intensiveness of the care required, they might look at a private nurse. In those circumstances, even though the person is under the care of the local authority, for the most part, with the majority of their care, that aspect couldn't be funded or managed by the local authority. So in those circumstances, that would have to be funded by the CCG for the NHS. So in those circumstances, what we call it is a joint funded package of care. So the local authority would be responsible for the funding of the social care, and the CCG responsible for the healthcare and the nursing care. This also applies to NHS funded nursing care. Now, this is particularly for individuals who are in a registered nursing home and require to be in a registered nursing home. So for those people in a registered nursing home, once again, they may not be eligible for continuing healthcare. It's maybe that's, sorry, I lose my track. Sorry, a question popped up, so I will get to the questions at the end. It's really hard not to read when something pops up. So that's fine. Do continue to ask the questions. I'm just going to minimize the chat box because I'll lose my place. I can't multitask. Right, so for individuals who are within a registered nursing home, so as I say, they may not be eligible for continuing healthcare, but the nursing element would still need to be funded by the NHS. So they have what's called funded nursing care contributions. Now, these are standard rates, which I think that's out of date. There we go. First mistake in the presentation. I think that might be out of date. I think that was last year's rate. So I think at the moment it's around, Joe, go on, do you remember?
That 183,
yeah,
185, something like
isn't
that.
it? Yeah, something like that. Yes, sorry. So I need to update that slide. It's yeah, parts of an old presentation. So yes, so it's a standard national rate, and that would go directly to the nursing home from the CCG to cover an aspect of the nursing care. So, okay. So now, many of you will probably have heard of this. If you've got any experience within continuing healthcare, then you've researched continuing healthcare, you may be familiar with this. So this is where continuing healthcare gets its legal background. I mean, not just this, but this is the most prominent piece of case law when it comes to continuing healthcare, and it's incredibly important in the history of continuing healthcare. And it's what's called the Coughlan Case. Now, the Coffin Case centres around a lady called Pamela Coughlan. She was actually a lady who was on the first slide, as it happens. Her picture was on the first slide. Pamela Coughlan, she was in a road traffic accident which left her tetraplegic. I can't remember the year off the top of my head. Many years ago, she was paralysed. She had a spinal injury, and that left her needing ongoing care for life, effectively. At the time, people in Pamela Coughlan's situation were promised by the NHS a home for life. So that was that they would be placed within a home, and that would be their home for life, you know, and that would be funded for the duration of their life. However, in 1997, the NHS tried to wash their hands of responsibility for residents of Marden House, where she was resident, and they tried to sell the home when there was a change in the way the NHS was structuring itself. Now, Pamela Coughlan took this case to judicial review in 1998 and actually won the initial case, but that was subsequently challenged by the Department of Health in 1999. The Court of Appeal actually upheld the original judgment and created an important concept of quantity and quality. So what was said at the time is that Pamela Coughlan's needs were of a quantity and quality that was beyond what social services could be expected to provide, because that was the suggestion at the time, that it would no longer be the responsibility of the NHS and it would become the responsibility of the local authority. That was what was challenged within the courts, and this landmark judgment was laid down, and the judge described her needs as being of a wholly different category to social care, and her healthcare needs were far beyond the local authority's obligations. So from that, we got a precedent within continuing healthcare didn't exist at that point, but we got a precedent within the boundaries between health and social care. So out of that, long story short, we ended up with the primary health need test, which was to try and determine whether or not the needs were of a wholly different category to that of social care. So that's what they are trying to identify within this is, as I say, the quantity and quality of the care needs that are required, and whether or not these fall predominantly within healthcare or whether they fall predominantly within social care. So now, when talking about the Coffin case, there is a school of thought around this, and it's quite a popular school of thought of, and that is, well, Pamela Coughlan, her needs, if they were to be assessed today, you could look at them and say, well, her nursing needs are not actually that great. You know, she's doubly incontinent, requiring regular catheterization. You know, she's paralyzed. You know, she does have, you know, impaired respiratory function. But if you were to, you know, sit and speak with her, you'd think absolutely fine. She's, you know, cognitively, she's all there. She's, you know, very much active and, you know, social. And you would think, well, but, you know, when you actually look at her overall care needs, you know, they are, as the judge, you know, said, of a wholly different category. She has a primary health need. Now, people looking at that, you know, would look at her and say, well, my relative needs are a lot greater than that. You know, her, you know, if she's able to, you know, maintain a certain degree of independence, then, well, if the, you know, my, you know, mother, father, son, daughter, if their needs are greater than that, then surely they should be eligible for continuing healthcare. And it's a very tempting approach to take within all of this. The one caveat to that is, though, that this isn't, whilst she laid down the benchmark for how it should be determined to a certain extent, it's an important benchmark as far as how care needs are considered. Her needs were not considered in that way. So they were not shared in such a way that Pamela Coughlan is the benchmark. She is not the benchmark for eligibility. The approach that should be taken is the benchmark for eligibility within this. So, as I say, the one temptation, and this is something we get very commonly, is that if the needs are greater than that of Pamela Coughlan, which, well, her needs aren't within the public domain, not really, not to any extent. If they are greater, then, well, must be eligible, and that's a false assumption, because, well, one, you know, she has a very particular type of care need, you know, a very particular type of care need. A lot of it, as I say, is quite hidden. You know, if you were to look at her, you wouldn't necessarily know her care needs, but they are quite significant. And fundamentally, this is an individualized process as well. This is not about drawing comparisons to other people. So going through an assessment process for continuing healthcare it's tempting to look at other people. It's tempting to look at the person down the corridor in the home or in the, you know, in the supported living or wherever it may be, and say, well, they've got it and they're not quite as bad as this person, so, you know, surely they must. It's tempting. My advice to everyone is resist temptation. I would say, you know, it never gets anywhere from experience. You know, as I say, this is an individualized assessment and you can't draw comparisons. You know, if you look at someone, say Pamela Coughlan, who has a spinal injury, very significant care needs, absolutely. But, you know, how do you compare that to someone with a learning disability? How do you compare that to someone with a dementia such as Alzheimer's or Parkinson's or a, you know, a brain injury, an acquired brain injury, for instance? They're not really comparable and they're very, very different. So, okay, so that's a brief overview of the criteria. Now, there'll be some questions, I'm sure, and we will go through them in time, absolutely. But next stage is, well, okay, how is eligibility assessed? So there are 3 stages here, and Joe's going to take you through these. I'm going to hand over to Joe. Very basically, we've got a 3-stage process, as you'll see here. So we've got the checklist to begin with. We've got a multidisciplinary team assessment, and we've got the decision-making process. So I'll hand over to Joe. Joe, I'm going to try and share control so you can click through the slides without, I'll do the first one for you. So we've got Fasttrack to begin with, but let me see, I'll make sure. Right. You should have control, Joe, hopefully.
Okay, I'll just have a fiddle just to make sure the slides change when they should. If not,
there we go.
Yes,
yep.
I think I have on time. Okay, so right, okay, so Fasttrack is a little bit different. We will go on to the, you know, the checklist and the DST. Fasttrack is different. Fasttrack means that somebody would not actually have a full assessment if they're eligible for Fasttrack, because they actually only have to meet 2 criteria. One is that somebody has a rapidly deteriorating condition, which may be entering the terminal phase, and also that they are rapidly deteriorating. Now, if an appropriate clinician, and that must be somebody who is involved in the patient's diagnosis and treatment, has got to the stage of saying that's the case, they get in touch with the clinical commissioning group, and Fasttrack is just put in place very, very quickly with no assessments, because what they're actually doing is assuming eligibility. So Fasttrack is sometimes appropriate for people, and it does mean that this is one area where somebody can become eligible without going through the full assessment process. So that's really Fasttrack. But if we're going on to the full assessment, let me just change my, which is the, oh, and then, sorry, we've got some key principles here, of course, that are very important to continuing healthcare. Any person going through the assessment should be at the centre of that assessment. So this is very, very person-centred. Should include them. The process should be transparent. The person being assessed and their families should be kept in the loop all the time. Their involvement should be maximised, as it says here. Consent has to be obtained. So the whole process should be fair and consistent from the beginning of the assessment, which starts with the checklist, which we will go on to. So what have we got next? So this is what a checklist actually looks like. That might be a bit small for you to see, but basically the checklist is actually the first part of the assessment. So if anybody is going to try to apply for continuing healthcare, they will have to go through the checklist stage, unless of course they're fast-tracked, or it's deemed by the clinical commissioning group that it's appropriate to completely skip the checklist, because it's absolutely obvious that the person needs a full assessment. But checklist is normally where it starts. So now the checklist is not meant to be desperately complicated, because this is not something that's carried out as a pre-assessment of eligibility. It's a screening tool that tells the assessor if the person being assessed should go on to have a full assessment for continuing healthcare. This part of the process, and this comes through, oh my,
sorry Joe, that was me. That was me,
Is that
Joe.
you?
Sorry. Yeah, sorry.
Oh dear, don't worry, Chris, I can handle it.
Okay, sorry.
It's all right. Actually, that's the right slide I need to be on anyway, so that's fine. Yes, so when people come through to the helpline, this is actually the part of the assessment where people really need to be persistent, because immediately the myths come in, and they might come to the helpline saying, well, I asked for a checklist 6 months ago, but somebody told me no chance, don't even bother, which is, you know, very annoying to hear, because that's not fair to anybody. It's like sort of having an assessment by one person who says you're not going to be eligible from the beginning, so don't even bother having a checklist. And that does happen. People will go away and not try, but anybody with significant care needs could be checklisted. The checklist has to be done by a health or social care professional, so that could be GP, district nurse, social worker. Just one person can do it if they're trained to do it, so it shouldn't be desperately complicated. You wouldn't expect a checklist to, say, take 3 hours like a DST might do. It's made to be simply completed. The checklist will look at 11 domains, which we'll look at in a minute, and each domain is scored either with an A, B or C, depending on the level of need chosen. So C is the lowest level of need, A is the highest level of need, and to have a positive checklist, somebody would require either 2 A's, 5 B's, or 1 A and 4 B's. And any of those scoring combinations would should lead to a full DST. And once that's been ascertained, then that person actually has a right to that full assessment. Representatives can be present. So family, the framework tells us that families should be very, very much included, whether they have power of attorney or not. So you can decide you're going to be at the checklist, you can ask to be at the checklist, and the clinical commissioning group should allow that. The threshold here is set quite low. That's to ensure that if in doubt, if there's anybody where it's not clear if they need a full assessment, the threshold is set low, so they're more likely to screen somebody in than they are to screen somebody out. One thing to be noted though, and again, we do hear this occasionally on the helpline, a checklist is not, a positive checklist is not an automatic, you can't automatically assume that if somebody has a positive checklist, they will have a successful DST. The DST is looked at slightly differently, well, very differently really, which we'll come on to, but it doesn't mean to say if you have a positive checklist, you will have a positive assessment. Okay, let's go on to the next slide. I'm not very patient with this, so I'll probably jump to, because all right, it doesn't seem to be moving. Have you got control, Chris, or have you?
Hold on. There, yeah, I'm not sure why that wasn't. Yeah, sorry, go on.
Okay, don't worry. Not a lot to say on this slide, really. It's very self-explanatory. Within the checklist, there are 11 domains that include all of the domains that you can see there. The checklist just has 11 domains. The actual DST has 12 domains that are looked at. So that's pretty self-explanatory, and I dare say, you know, you're fairly familiar with that. So let's move on. Chris, you might have to move me on. I think
sorry.
It doesn't seem to be. It's all right. It's all right. So this is really what a checklist looks like. So you've got various levels of needs. There are descriptors within it. So to have, say, a B in mobility, you can see you've got various descriptors that need applying. And you're trying really to match the care needs to those descriptors. And as far as I'm concerned, when I'm talking to people, if they match, you know, you should be able to have them. We sort of warn people against trying to go too high because they want somebody to be eligible, because if it doesn't match you know, you won't be able to have that category. On the other hand, assessors shouldn't go unrealistically low, because if their descriptor doesn't match, then, you know, they shouldn't be able to have it either. The standards apply both ways. Okay. It says I can control this, but I don't think I can, Chris.
Sorry, there we go. I might have to drive. Sorry.
You might have to drive. I'll put my seatbelt on. Right. So what happens next? If you meet the threshold and you have a positive checklist, you should be informed of that outcome and contacted so that a full assessment can be arranged for you. Somebody, I think, did ask just now a question, how, you know, what are the time limits? If a CCG clinical commissioning group receive a positive checklist, they should put a DST in place and come to their conclusion about the decision outcome of that DST within 28 days.
Chris, sorry, I'm just going to interrupt because somebody's got their hand up. Sorry.
No, that's fine. That's fine.
Okay.
I know you've got your hand up, but it says iPad still. I'd come. Do you want to come off mute? You have to press mute. You have to unmute. Sorry, we can't hear you.
There we go. Is that better?
Yeah.
Yeah.
There we go.
Yeah. I just wondered at this stage, might it be appropriate to speak of ancillary and incidental aspects of the DST tools?
So
Yeah,
we'll come on
Chris.
to that. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we can come on to that. As I say, that comes a little bit later. So yeah, we will cover that in a little bit later when we're talking about kind of the recommendation side of it as well. So we are building up to it. So yeah.
Okay, great. Thank you.
No problem.
Chris, do you
Okay.
want to answer the questions as we go along, or do you want to wait?
I think just because we've got a lot to get through, I think if we save them to the end, I've just, while Joe's been talking, I've been having a look through some of the questions as well. So just and making a note. So we will try and get through them all at the question and answers at the end. But I just think for the sake of time, we'll move on. I suspect like that, we will probably answer them as we go along anyway. So it kind of naturally over time. So if that's okay, thank you.
Okay, so going back to then what happens after the checklist. If you didn't meet the threshold, if you didn't have that positive checklist and you thought you should have, it's not the end of the story. Although there's no formal appeal process for a checklist being challenged, you can go back to the CCG and challenge it and say, you didn't agree for whatever reasons with the outcome. You write to them and you can ask them to review the checklist. And obviously, if you did, if you were in agreement that yes, okay, for the time being the checklist is negative, it doesn't mean to say you can't have another checklist in the future. I usually say to people, keep your continuing healthcare information not too far away from you. It doesn't make scintillating reading, granted, but if people stay familiar with the process, they'll be able to ascertain whether it's the right time to ask again to be assessed based on some changes to the care needs. Okay, I'm trying to go on to the next slide. I'm not sure why it's not letting me.
No, I'm not sure.
Was that me or you?
No, that was me. I'll drive for now, Joe. So just let me know. So yeah.
Okay. Right, okay, so once you've had the checklist, assuming that the checklist is positive, you then go on to a full assessment for continuing healthcare. That's known as the MDT meeting, where the decision support tool document is completed. And there are some rules around the MDT, which are very important. So the first of those is that the MDT has to be made up of a certain combination of people. There's a bare minimum we can have. The very, very bare minimum is to have 2 professionals from healthcare who help to carry out the assessment. If you have 2 professionals from healthcare, they must be from differing backgrounds. So nobody should be having a DST where 2 healthcare professionals appear from the clinical commissioning group who both come from the same place, same background. That's not really going to be fair as an assessment, and that would not be framework compliant. A better bare minimum is to have 2 professionals, one from healthcare and one from social care. That obviously makes perfect sense because as we've already pointed out, any assessment of care needs is basically made up of a mixture of health and social needs. So the ideal combination for a team is to have one of each assessing, so that they can have conversations around what these needs are in terms of health or social, or a combination of. Now, I say that's a bare minimum. That is the bare minimum because an even better MDT would have the health and social care professional and maybe some other people who are knowledgeable about the individual's health and social needs, and people who have been involved in assessment, treatment and care of the individual, because the more information you get about the person who's being assessed, the more accurate the DST is likely to be at the end, whether it's eligible or non-eligible. One of the things you do want is an accurate assessment. So as I said, the bare minimum we often see, but it would be nicer to see a really good team of people coming to the MDT to fill in the decision support tool document. Okay, Chris. I'll let you move me on.
Okay,
yep.
Sorry. Yes.
What's going to happen at this assessment? They're going to discuss care needs, obviously. Sadly, at the moment, not many of these meetings happen in person because of COVID, and they are very often virtual now. This is all arranged and coordinated by the assessor once somebody has been referred for a DST meeting. They're generally referred to as the nurse assessor. We get asked lots of questions about these virtual assessments. Are they fair? Does it really mean anything when the assessors haven't met the patient in person? My answer to that is they are not let off the hook because they can't visit the person, but they have a duty to be researching, to be gathering evidence, to be talking to the care home, to be talking to anybody they need to talk about, really about what this person's needs are. So there should be a good amount of research going on in the background, gathering of information, etc., so that when they come to this meeting, they can have discussions, have some knowledge, and assess accurately. And then that team come together virtually at the moment, occasionally but in person, but the whole team come together then to complete the decision support tool based on all the evidence that they've gathered. And the DST is a document that must be used to assist in this. They can't use another document, and that document should not be changed or altered in any way. What part does the family take? The family takes an important part, very, very often, particularly with the people who are being cared for at home. The family are the people who know the person best, and they can be very, very useful in giving supporting evidence for what is decided in the domains for all the care needs. So individuals should be welcomed, they should be included, they should be allowed to ask questions, and they should be allowed to contribute to all the conversations that happen during the DST. Okay, Chris. Okay, this is a little slide of what the decision support tool looks like, I should say. It's a document that is available online. It can be downloaded. It's a public document, so it's easy to get hold of. It should be given to people, to families, before the DST takes place, or at least they should have a blank copy on the day so they can see what's being completed. But that's pretty much what it looks like. It has 3 sections, one which documents all the personal details. It's the area that deals with the consent, who's present. The pen portrait is generally the background of a patient's condition and maybe a bit about their life, how they got to this stage, why they've got to this point of needing significant care. The second part goes on to go through all the different domains, of which there are 12 in the DST. And then the recommendation, and this is a really important part which we'll be covering, is the key characteristics. And this is the main difference between the decision support tool and the checklist. The decision support tool looks at domains first, much more analytically than the checklist. And I think if we move on a slide, Chris, I think, yeah, so those are the domains that are looked at. There is an extra one on here called other significant care needs, which wasn't on the checklist. That's to cover any areas that aren't covered in any of those other domains that you see there. So something that just doesn't fit into those, that is having a significant effect on the care needs, can be looked at in other significant care needs. And I think if we move on to the next one, you'll see here this differs significantly to the checklist. The checklist, we had 3 levels of need to choose from in each domain. We had A, B, and C. The care domains in the DST give us lots more choice, and this is why you can't sort of say an A in the checklist in, say, nutrition is going to automatically be a severe in the DST, that it doesn't equate like that because the DST is much more analytical, and across several of the domains you actually have up to 6 things you can choose from, going from no needs right up to priority level of needs, although they don't all carry the priority level. The higher the level of needs, the more we expect to see that the needs are health needs. But we generally find that all DSTs have a combination of health and social needs. And care needs, all the needs should be considered. If anyone ever says to you, no, you can't, we talked about that in a different domain, so we're not looking at it again. If it's relevant to that domain, there is no such thing as double scoring. So you, in actual fact, you can look at it again in another domain if it's relevant to that domain as well. Okay, now this to me is the bread and butter of my job, because I sometimes feel that my job wouldn't be necessary if we didn't have this grid. As I've explained, the DST looks at all the different care domains and gives a level of need and a weighting to those domains. But the DST looks at the needs, I say it looks at them with 2 sets of eyes, because it analyses the domains and the level of needs, and then it goes on to consider all of the needs in the round. So it looks at the care package in the round, looks at it as a whole, and it starts, they start to ask the question, right, well, now we know what all the levels of need are going to be. Does this care package have any elements that give us greater complexity, intensity, unpredictability, and what are the nature of the needs? Now that's really, really important, because that makes up a big chunk of the eligibility criteria. And I think if we go on to the next slide, which talks about the indicative threshold, if we're going through the domains and somebody was awarded either 2 severes or 1 level of priority within the domains, you would pretty much expect that to lead to eligibility. And I think if we only had the indicative threshold, my job probably wouldn't be necessary. I don't know how you feel about that, Chris, but that would be
It would
so
be a lot
simple
simpler.
and
Yeah.
so simple and straight. It would either be yes or no. There's 2 severes or there's not, or 1 level of priority. But and it's good news for people being assessed, because if people score under that, so supposing we're looking at 1 severe, 2 moderate, 2 highs, 5 moderates, that could still be considered for eligibility, but it then comes down to, well, okay, that's what we've got, but do we have something fairly out of the ordinary in terms of the complexity, the unpredictability, the intensity, or the nature of the needs? And that's a little bit more difficult because you don't have the descriptors to go to in those areas. This is looked at in terms of what's understood in those areas, and there is guidance for that, but it's a little bit more abstract. But it's very, very important, and certainly extremely important when we come on to appeals, because you need to, if you're appealing, you need to deal with the domains and those other areas called the key characteristics. So that sort of is pretty much what the DST comprises of. So next slide, Chris, please.
I think I'll take over from here, Joe. So
okay.
Yeah. So thank you, Joe. Yeah.
Lovely.
So,
you're welcome.
So yes, thanks for that, Joe. So next stage, I will try and maybe put in a 5-minute break in a minute when I've gone through the recommendations. So it's, I appreciate this is heavy going stuff, and yeah, quite difficult to wrap your head around. I've been having a look at some of the questions as they've been coming through, all really good questions and to be expected in these circumstances as well. So we will get to them, I promise. Honestly, I'll try and get to them all. If there's any I don't get to, I will make sure that that the answers are sent out at a later date anyway. So I'll try and do absolutely everything in the time. So coming to the recommendations. So as Joe has said, once you've gone through the gone through the checklist and the decision support tool. When it comes to the decision support tool, the final section within this comes to the recommendation. Now, the recommendation is made by the multidisciplinary team. For fairly obvious reasons, the individual doesn't get a say in the recommendation, as I'm sure the eligibility figures would go up significantly if they did. But recommendation is determined not only by that indicative threshold that Joe was just talking about, looking at the one priority or two severe levels of need, but in terms of identifying the primary health need beyond that, you need to break down all of the care needs as a whole to kind of look at the overall care package holistically, to come back to this idea of, is this predominantly healthcare or is this predominantly social care? Now, one example that I was going to give before, and I think I missed it on the slide, was around looking at the difference between health and social care needs. So to kind of give an example, and I think this was mentioned in the questions as well, so I will cover this one quickly because this is incredibly important. So to give an example of looking at the difference between health and social care needs, if you're, say, looking at, say, continence care, for instance. Now, looking at someone whose continence care is fairly non-problematic, it's fairly routine. A lot of the care and support around that may be around washing and dressing. It's more regular than most people, admittedly, but that's predominantly where the care needs lie, and that comes very broadly under social care. And we can go back to the elements of social care a bit later on as well. If, however, the needs are more complex, so say, for instance, we're looking at more chronic health conditions. So say, for instance, we're looking at someone who has chronic urinary tract infections, has issues with bowel management, has issues with a catheter, for instance. Those issues. I mean, there's a multitude of issues as well around continence care, which I won't go into, but there's a multitude of issues there. And if the care is predominantly around managing those health conditions, then that can be considered to be more of a healthcare need. And that's what they're trying to identify within this. Obviously not just within the domain of continence, which you'll see was one of the domains within the assessment process, but looking at the care needs overall. And that's what the recommendation then looks to establish, is once you've looked at all of the care needs, once you've tried to identify the healthcare needs and the social care needs as best as you can, you then need to draw them together a little bit, because if you were to do a tally, then that wouldn't be equitable either, because someone may have one or two healthcare needs, but they may be so time consuming, complicated, and difficult to manage that they overwhelm the package. They might have more in number, they might have more social care needs, but their healthcare needs in particular are so difficult to manage that they overwhelm the overall care package. And that is what they're looking at within the recommendations. So they're looking at the nature, intensity, complexity, and unpredictability. And these are what we call the 4 key characteristics. And these are the means of summing up all of the information that was contained within the domains. And rather using it as a scoring system, rather than tallying them up and saying, well, there's more healthcare needs or there's more social care needs, it's about looking at them as an overall, as the overall picture. So looking at nature is looking at the type of care that someone requires, very basically. So this is the description that's given in the decision support tool itself. I'm not going to read it out for the sake of time, but to break it down very, very quickly, it's looking at the overall type of care that someone requires. Once again, breaking it down more into the health and social care elements, but looking at predominantly where the care needs lie as well. I mean, is it lying more within the mental health? Is it more within the physical or psychological needs? Where predominantly do the care needs lie? What quality of care do they require more than anything? And I think nature's probably one of the more difficult ones to quantify a little bit, I think, but it very much serves as a summary of what's been discussed within the domains, looking at the type of care that's required and where it predominantly lies. Now, the intensity, so this relates to the quantity and severity of the needs. So to break it down into easy to understand terms, it's talking about the amount of care that's required. So you can get two people with very similar care needs, but one may take 20 minutes, the other one may take 5 hours. So to assess them, just as the individual care needs, you would look at them and say, well, they are the same. But when you take into account the intensity of care needs, looking at how long does it take, how often does it need to be delivered, and how many people are required to deliver that care at any one time. So within this, you might be, as an example, you might be looking at one-to-one care, for instance, or two-to-one care in some cases. So if someone is requiring one-to-one supervision or support, well, in those circumstances, that becomes a much more intense level of care and support. So that's what they're trying to identify within intensity. Complexity. Complexity is looking at the way in which needs interact with each other. Once again, I'm not going to read through what it says within the decision support tool, as it's rather long-winded, but break it down very simply, is looking at the way in which needs interact with each other. So it could be that a single condition may have an interaction between the different domains. They might have an interaction between other conditions. So when you're looking at the domains, and this is what Jo said at the end of one of her slides, I believe, was that looking at one care need may not cover everything within that. So to give an example, so say for instance, if someone has reduced mobility, say if they're bedbound, for instance, now you would look at that within the decision support tool, very obviously within mobility. It's a lack of mobility in that case. However, their lack of mobility is, and if they are, say also incontinent, for instance, well, the mobility combined with the continence is going to have an impact on their skin integrity. You're going to be developing pressure sores and pressure damage. That's a fairly obvious and quite common complexity there. So it's an example of two needs interacting with each other to make other needs more difficult, or each individual need more difficult to manage. Now, that's an obvious one. There is no rules on these, they can be as complex as they are, so, a less obvious example might be medication, for instance, might have an impact on someone's behavior, a negative impact on their behavior. It may make them unsteady on their feet, impacting their mobility. Their continence care may impact on their psychological and emotional well-being. So it's looking at it in that way, looking at how they interact with each other to make the overall care more difficult to manage. And that's important in establishing the overall difficulty and the overall picture of that person's care needs. So unpredictability. So unpredictability, I would say, is probably the most self-explanatory of the lot in many ways. So it's the degree to which the needs fluctuate. So I think someone asked about this within the chat, actually. I will go back and cover some of these questions, but someone asked this within the chat is, yes, what do you do with changing capacity or changing care needs? Then, well, yeah, absolutely. That goes to make the care overall more difficult. I would say it makes sense that someone who has a fluctuating condition is going to be more difficult to manage than someone who has a stable condition. It's that variability in the care and that unpredictability, not just of individual care needs, but of their care overall, which changes or fluctuates or deteriorates over time, makes the care more difficult to plan for and more difficult to deliver. So when they've done that, they would need to make a recommendation. Now, there are several key points on how they should make this recommendation. Several principles that they need to adhere by. I would say the most important one comes from paragraph 65 of the National Framework, and I know this off by heart through doing the work that we do. It is the most commonly quoted paragraph that I give on a regular basis. And, I say, if you can take away anything from today, if you're going through an assessment, paragraph 65 tells you, it more or less sums everything you need to know to make sure that they're doing it right. So the reasons given for a decision on eligibility should not be based upon the individual's diagnosis, the setting of care, the ability of the care provider to manage care, the use or not of NHS employed staff to provide care, the need for or presence of specialist staff in care delivery, and the fact that a need is well managed, and that one's incredibly important, and the existence of other NHS funded care or any other input related rather than needs related rationale. What that's basically saying is that what they are focusing on, what they should be focusing on within this, is the care. This is not an assessment of the care provider or the care provision as such. And I know that may sound like a very unclear distinction, but what we will see commonly is that a person's needs will be marginalized because they're being so well managed, because they might be in a fantastic nursing home or fantastic placement, whatever it might be. And for that reason, yeah, they're doing well, they might be thriving, but that shouldn't impede, that doesn't mean they don't have care needs. It's not an assessment of how well they're doing, it's an assessment of how they need to be cared for. And is that healthcare or is that social care? That's what they're looking for within all of this. So I'm not going to go through every single one of these points. We've already talked about diagnosis within the Mythbusters at the beginning, and the setting of care as well. Incredibly important. As I say, the ability of the care provider to manage care is irrelevant. If you were to get two people, exactly the same care needs, one was to be in the best care home in the world, absolutely fantastic, meeting their care needs perfectly, and you would have person B who is in no care home at all, really struggling, safeguarding issues left, right, and centre, lots and lots of problems. A good assessment would look at them and assess them exactly the same, because it's not about the care that's being provided, it's about the care that's needed. And that's incredibly important within that. One point that I will touch upon as well is the need for a presence of specialist staff in care delivery. Now, this is incredibly important because often there's a misunderstanding around continuing healthcare and about the primary health need test. A lot of people get the impression it's about a primary nursing need and it's about nursing care. It is not. It is not about who delivers the care. Whether the care is delivered by a nurse, a doctor, consultant, highest doctor in the land, Chris Whitty, whoever it might be, it doesn't matter. That's not what it's about at all. It's not about who delivers the care. It's about what care needs to be provided. So whether it's delivered by Chris Whitty or whether it's delivered by the plumber that lives next door, doesn't matter what care is being provided, or needs to be provided, I should say. Right. Final bit, and then I think we'll have a quick break. We are running a bit long with this, so I hope people are okay for time, and I do want to get to all the questions if I can. We've still got to get on to kind of care planning commissioning, so I will give us a little bit of a break because I know this has been very long and I'm probably all a bit fed up of me and wine glasses might be empty. So when making a recommendation, the multidisciplinary team will send back their recommendation, and bear in mind it's a recommendation. It's an important word, but yeah, the distinction is not too clear. So the recommendation will be sent back to the CCG for decision making. So it's the CCG that makes the decision. The CCG must accept the recommendation, however, unless there are exceptional circumstances for doing so. So they may send it back for further work if it's incomplete or there's any major problems with it. Then they can send it back to the multidisciplinary team for further work to address those concerns that they've got. That's not overturning it, that's not overturning their recommendation, but they can send it back for further work. They can overturn it if there is a clear mismatch between the evidence that's being provided and the recommendation. However, there's a big however there. The CCG cannot simply overturn a decision simply because they would have reached a different decision when presented with the same evidence. There's an unclear distinction between the two of them there. So if it's just a case of evidence is brilliant, but we would have perhaps erred on a different side of eligibility, that's not a good enough excuse to overturn the recommendation of a multidisciplinary team. If it goes to them and there's the evidence states very clearly one set of needs and they're making a decision with no real justification for their decision, then they can overturn it in those circumstances. So there's a bit of a mismatch there, absolutely. But right, okay. I said it was going to be the final one, but this is going to be the final one. So how do you prepare for an assessment? And I think this was one of the questions within the chat as well. In terms of preparing for an assessment, make sure you download and review the documents we've talked about today. So the checklist and the decision support tool are incredibly important. What I would say is use those documents at each stage that they're being used to make your notes. The meetings that will take place often follow the format of those documents. They act as an agenda for you. They also allow you to follow the questions that are being asked. They allow you to look in advance exactly what they're going to be looking for. It gives you access to the to the descriptors of the different levels of need within the decision support tool, for example. There's lots and lots of information within them. So it's always important to use them. You can obviously make other notes, that's absolutely fine, but I would say, you know, use those as your basis, because that's an easy way of being organized. It's a very practical way of getting all your thoughts down in one area. Ensure that all care plans and records, you know, such as ABC charts or daily care logs, anything like that, are accurate and up to date. Speak to the care provider beforehand if you can. Any concerns you've got about the care provider or their care records or their record keeping, address them in as much in advance as you can and make sure that they're updated. This often tends to be too much of a paper-based exercise. It shouldn't be, don't get me wrong, it absolutely shouldn't be. In many cases, they are very dependent on the care records, and they'll say, well, care records say that, you're saying this, I'm going on the care records. Absolutely the wrong approach, and I can't state that strongly enough. But if the care records are not wrong in the first place, it avoids a potentially difficult situation. Make sure that any other assessments have been completed. So I think someone asked about, you know, potential sources of information within the chat. So things such as, you know, physio reports, speech and language therapist reports, falls risk assessments, as I say, things like ABC charts or anything like that. Any information or evidence which talks about the person's needs is incredibly important within this. One last thing as well, check who is attending the meeting. So we talked about who should be in the multidisciplinary team, and we talked about the importance of having people who are knowledgeable of the individual's care needs. And I think this was another question as well within the chat. If there is someone actively involved in the care, and that can be from regular carers, a district nurse, a GP, it can be a regular physiotherapist or speech and language therapist, occupational therapist. If there's someone with that active involvement, a health and social care professional with that active involvement, make sure they're involved. You know, make sure they're within the meeting. You know, if they've not been contacted, contact them yourself if you have to. You shouldn't have to. And a lot of what we say today, you shouldn't have to do if the principles are followed. But unfortunately, we're very busy and we know that the principles aren't followed. You know, we would be very quiet if they were followed. So yes, so anything that you can do to help is incredibly useful. Right, I know we're at 8:30 and I was hoping to be going on to questions by this point. I think if everyone's okay, if we have a 2 minutes or 5 minute break, we come back at, I don't know, say 25 to, if that's okay, and we'll go on to the last bit on kind of care planning and commissioning and reviews. It will probably be a bit quicker in the second part. We've done the majority of it, we've broken the back of it, so you'll be pleased to know, I'm sure. So if we come back in about 5 minutes, give everyone a chance to stretch their legs, top up glasses and things like that, and come back. Is that okay?
Thank you, Chris. We'll see you all in 5 minutes.
Okay.
I did say that I've already sent you the link for the care certificate already.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you, Tash.
Where you can find, if you look on the Skills for Care website, you'll find lots of work which they've been doing as well, which everyone here might find useful as well.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you.
Joe. Hi, Joe.
Hello.
Joe, it's me. Yeah, Joe, there's so many questions.
There are, aren't there?
Could you answer some in the chat, you know, as they come along?
I can try. It's a bit difficult because I'm sort of listening to Chris at the same time and trying to kind of make sure I'm in the right place for the bits I'm doing. Yeah, it's a bit tricky to do it at the same time. Do you think we should perhaps have 10 minutes for some questions before we go on to the next bit?
I think so.
I think that would be really helpful, Joe. I'm concerned that we've only got half an hour left.
Yeah, okay. There's just so much to this, as you're well aware. So we tried to cover as much as we possibly can. Yeah, we'll have a word with Chris when he comes back from his break, and
thanks, Joe.
you know, we can do what what suits you best, really.
Yeah, because what we can do is we can send out the link to the navigational tool on your website, and that I think includes a lot of the information that you're talking through at the minute.
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay, No, that's fine. I'm sure Chris will be happy to sort of fit in with what suits you best
Fabulous.
as a group, rather than just, you know, plod through all the information. Because as you say, we can get most of it to you. And of course, you know, you will go away with the links to Beacon and the helpline number.
Yeah.
So, you know, people can come to us directly as well.
Yeah.
And have a chat. So, okay, I'll just go and get a drink of water, and I'll be back in just a moment.
Lovely. Thanks, Jo.
Okay, you're welcome.
Just lay there, sit you. When we all play the National Lottery, a little fun stuff happens.
George, you've been putting lots of questions in the chat. Is this something you're going through at the minute?
I'm an advocate, and I'm a carer as well, and a parent. So I work with SOS SEN as an advocate and parents against many local authorities. And so we have people who are currently under Children and Families Act, so EHC process, but very often they transition out and away from there into continuing care. So
what, at 18 you mean?
It varies. So I mean, it depends. I mean, generally speaking, from compulsory school age onwards, but I mean, that depends upon whether you can keep them within the EHC process by having conditions which can be trained or educated. So that under health and social care, if you can receive training or education, can still be then ported into an EHC plan. But as many people have already said within here, there are very limited scope in terms of what you can actually get in terms of support and win through a tribunal process, which is not fairly assessed, nor are the means of the two sides comparable in terms of argument and resource. The biggest issue with that area, and I think it also leads into this from everything I've seen so far, is the quality and depth and scope of the assessments. You know, without that, you're not going to get any informed way of making a decision moving forward about, you know, what the appropriate care looks like, what the scope of it is, and who's going to fund what. And the EHC process, and I don't know whether this is the same within continuing healthcare, but it very often turns into sort of a slanging match between local authority, health and social care as to who's paying for what, who covers what. And well, actually that's the social care. No, but it's also health, and it's just nightmare. And with it being an annual plan as well, EHCs, rather than something which is continuing, you then, by the time you've got it ordered, you're already at annual review, and the process starts again, and then they again try and, you know, dial back everything that you've got within that. So it's very interesting from my point of view, because there are going to be some situations where people technically would benefit from still receiving an EHC plan, but if CHC is going to be something which increases the scope of what support these families and individuals need, then, you know, would they be better off by pursuing that avenue rather than EHC? So I'm looking at it from looking down the road for my kids. One is definitely going to always need support. I think both likelihood is that they're both always going to need support because of their vulnerabilities and because of their issues. But it's also in terms of other people that are I'm advising and I'm helping and sort of aging out of the process. I mean, there are many people I know locally through local support groups that have kids that are now in the process of transitioning out. So I want to be as informed as possible and try to help.
I think someone's not on mute. Oh, that's brilliant. Sorry, George, we lost the last bit of what you were saying then.
No, I was just saying there are many people that have already supported with EHCs that their kids, well, I say their kids, they're young people, are in the process of aging out of that process, or have gone past the parents' capacity to continue fighting on their behalf. I mean, that's me being as polite and putting it as discreetly as I possibly can, because, you know, our boys have been in the process since they were 4, they're 9 now, and it's exhausting every single year having to fight for what should be a basic right. And it is what it is. The game is the game, but you have to fight it. So you're in the game, so you have to play it. You may as well try and win it.
Yeah. Thanks, George. I can see that Chris is back.
I am.
Chris,
back and refreshed. Good. Yeah.
We were just having a conversation, Chris, while you were off, about it's now 22, and there are a lot of questions.
Yes.
And we need to finish on time, because people's time is precious. So we were wondering if I can signpost people to the navigational toolkit that you've got.
That's absolutely fine. Yeah.
And if we could go straight into some of these questions.
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah, if that's what you want to do, that's fine. I'm absolutely happy to do that. Yeah, that's not a problem at all. So, okay, yeah, that's fine. Okay, I'll have a quick. I was having a quick look through as we were talking as well. So, right, okay, let me go back to the beginning.
There was the first one that we had was one from George asking, what act does the guidance follow?
Which act? So the act, it comes under the NHS Act in terms of the issues around continuing healthcare specifically. It's under the Standing Rules and Regulations for Clinical Commissioning Groups, which is its own separate act within the Care Act, not the Care Act, within the NHS Act as well. So that's, I can probably send that round. You know, if there's certain documents we want sending round as well, I'm happy to send you a pack paper if you then want to distribute it. That's absolutely fine. So yeah, so it's within the standing rules and regulations for
from my point of view as an advocate, it was just trying to sort of look at where the underpinning legal duties lie, rather than just the guidance.
Yes, so the underpinning legal duties come from the standing rules and regulations, which defines exactly what CCGs are required to do, which is the continuing healthcare process. So that's what's that's the legal underpinning, and that's what states they must have regard to the national framework, which is the guidance. So yeah. Okay.
Yeah, I'm just going through the questions here. There's been a lot just put in recently.
Yes, I was trying to get through them as well. Trying to, yeah. Okay.
There's a question here from Angie about communication. Angie, could I come to you so that you can ask it directly? You're on mute, Angie. You're still on mute.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, yeah.
The communication domain we found pretty challenging to navigate, both in the sense of how it's interpreted and how it interacts with other domains. In our circumstances, it was interpreted that because the person could make their needs known via idiosyncratic signing, that they didn't have communication issues. Even though, you know, there was lots of evidence to say most people can't interpret fatigue impacts. It impacts all aspects of a person's mental health, physical health, and ability to navigate the day. And to me, it seems that there's very little understanding of AAC, and it's tips really that I think we need to know how to work through evidencing. The complexities, really.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and I think, you know, you've kind of hit the nail on the head there. Really, is talking about the complexities within the domain. Really. So yes, I mean, in terms of special interventions required in order to to make that communication, that needs to be taken into account, and the impact that has on other care needs as well. So yeah, one aspect of communication is one, the ability to communicate the needs in any way. In some cases, obviously with severely impaired capacity, for instance, there might be no communication there, but if there is still a communication, still a certain degree of capacity, well, is there special measures needed to be taken to allow that communication to happen, and what impact does that have on other areas of care as well is incredibly important. Yeah, but yeah, it's, I don't have an excuse for why it was difficult. As I say, it should, I know it's often difficult to wrap your head around, but a good assessment shouldn't be that problematic. But I think that's what you've described to me is exactly the right approach, is not only looking at the ability to communicate needs, that's not where it stops, but it's also, well, how is that ability used? What are the special measures, and what's the impact on other areas of care? So, yeah.
Thank you.
We've got another question here, which I think a few people might be interested in. It's asking if there are any disadvantages of having a health budget.
Not necessarily. No, there shouldn't be, in theory, any disadvantages. In terms of having the difference between, say, a personal budget and a personal health budget, so moving between the local authority and the CCG, there shouldn't necessarily be any need for a change of provider as such. There shouldn't necessarily be any change of provider or provision. The only thing that may happen is if the care needs are not currently being met to the full extent, for whatever reason that may be, as I say, there is an upper limit on what a local authority can provide. Sorry, I can see hands up. I will get to you in a second. So if there is there being a limit on what a local authority can provide, and it's often more restrictive than what a CCG can provide, then there can actually be some benefits. I'd say the main downside is obviously going through the process, which can be incredibly difficult. So, but yeah, in terms of on an ongoing basis, there shouldn't be any downside as such. So, okay.
Thank you. Could we come to you, Geraldine? You've had your hand up, and then we'll come to you, Claire.
Yeah, I'm going to follow on communication.
Okay.
We've got a full healthcare package, but are CCG liable to support whatever he needs for communication? My son does not communicate with speech, but he communicates in a very RPM, which he points to letters and things, which you have to be trained to do it. Are they liable to help him? Because they've not done anything for an AAC, and they have stated that they've sent it back after I don't know how many years and a review panel thing that I have to write to the GP to ask him to be referred, but they will not take him on because he hasn't got a learning disability.
Right. Okay. The simple answer to that is that when someone's eligible for continuing healthcare, the CCG are responsible for meeting all of the person's assessed health and social care needs, and I can't emphasize that enough. So all health and social care needs are their responsibility. So if it is a need, it's a clearly assessed need.
And can they cap, we were talking about, can they cap what is needed for him to be able to learn to communicate with others?
There should be no arbitrary caps on funding. They can.
There is reasonableness, though, isn't there, Chris? Reasonableness.
There is reasonableness. They obviously have a responsibility to the public purse. You can't, you won't necessarily be able to have absolutely
but his communication is more important than them buying him a dishwasher, because the parents say there's no way they can wash the dishes.
Absolutely.
Or whatever.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Would this include an occupational therapist as well, because he has severe sensory processing disorder?
I mean, yes. I mean, potentially, yes, absolutely. Obviously, it's a bit difficult to say categorically on, on a case-by-case basis. But yeah, potentially, yeah. There's no reason not to.
I love you. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. That's good
Claire.
feedback. Thank you.
Claire.
Hello, I've got identical twins, one who's on CHC and one who's on a joint package. So I just wish to say that major disadvantage of CHC is that you lose your social worker. So if you happen to be trying to get hold of housing, you end up with absolutely no one who is prepared to help you without trying to go through the awfulness of re-referring yourself to social services and being ignored. Also, I think the major disadvantage of CHC is the lack of, certainly in our area, personnel who are prepared to take it onwards to help you manage the system.
Okay, yeah, no, absolutely. That's a fairly common experience, unfortunately. And that is, when someone is eligible for continuing healthcare, the care management responsibility from the local authority stops at that point. You know, they no longer have that responsibility. The only responsibility they've got is for safeguarding, which continues for all adults, regardless of how and where they're funded. However, when someone is eligible for CHC, they should have a named care manager, which, yes, I can see you being shocked and surprised by that. And that in itself doesn't shock and surprise me, unfortunately. They should have a named care manager or, you know, should have access to care management from the CCG. So they are, while they're not a social worker, they're often, you know, they might be a nurse, you know, for instance, you know, of some kind or another, but they act in the same way. They have that care management responsibility. So if you're not getting that, then it's a complaint, generally speaking, to the CCG, because they're failing in their responsibilities for that reason. So
I wonder if I could just interrupt a second.
Go for it, Joe. Yep, go on.
Yeah, I'm looking at something that I think Andrea and is it Geraldine are putting in here. It was going back to the question over communication and the impact it's having in other domains. And this is something I do tell people when they're, you know, asking me questions and coming through for appeal and things. Sometimes, because you can only have certain descriptors within the domain. So supposing the CCG had decided that communication had to sit in moderate because that's the descriptor that met the needs, but you're desperately frustrated because you think, no, it's more complicated than that. And you kind of realize, well, you can't disagree with that particular weighting because that's what it says in the descriptor and it matches, but there's more that you want to say. That comment that you want to say usually sits somewhere in either intensity, complexity, unpredictability. It's a question of thinking, well, what do I want to say more, but I can't have within the descriptor? Yeah. And it's like you're saying, but it affects so many other different domains. Now, a CCG won't allow you to just move it to a high because it doesn't fit the criteria, but they might be able to listen to your comments when you say, but the communication causes some complexity because it affects this, this, and this domain. And that's a good kind of principle. If there's something more than you want to say than you're allowed in the descriptor, it quite often fits in one of those other areas.
Yeah, I think that's really good advice, Joe. Absolutely, I'd absolutely mirror that. Is, you know, we touched upon those 4 key characteristics, and one thing I would say is that it's always useful to think about them at all stages. You know, when you're going through the domains, you know, think about the intensity of the care and the complexity, you know, and think about it in that way, because that is ultimately where it's leading, and I think that's incredibly useful. So, yeah, thanks, Joe.
We've still got a few hands up, but we've also had a few questions from you, Soraya, so in the chat. So I wondered if you might like to, the last one we had from you was about preparing for the 3-month review. Would you like to talk a little bit about that?
Hi. So we just had our DST and it went through on the behaviour, communication, cognition side. We've not heard anything since then, but we know that the current package he had under social wasn't adequate to meet like the level of needs he has. So what is the process for going about getting the right CHC package in place from this point on? Do we have any say at all, particularly as he wouldn't be able to advocate for himself? And when he's an adult, he'll be classed as no capacity.
Right. Okay. So yeah, absolutely. I mean, in terms of setting up a care package, as I said, before, that there should be a named care manager within this, and that part of their responsibility is making sure that the care that's being received is safe and appropriate to meet all of their care needs, and that's incredibly important. So yes, so when someone becomes eligible, there should be a kind of a transition period, between the local authority and the CCG. And during that time, they should be looking at the current care package, making sure that that's appropriate and safe to meet the needs, making sure that the care provider, whoever that may be, is appropriate and can continue to meet the needs, and making sure that if there's anything else that's needed, anything else that's being missing is included within that. So yeah, it should be a transparent and inclusive process. So if the individual doesn't have capacity to make their own decisions within that, then they are allowed a representative. So if it's yourself within this situation, then that's absolutely fine. They should be including you within that as a representative, acting in their best interests. So yeah, absolutely.
Does that answer your question, Soraya?
Yes.
Okay.
Wow.
Sorry, just to add, with the remit that the CCGs cover with under continuing healthcare funding, how does that differ in terms of the comparison to like the Care Act with the quality of life, like mental and physical well-being, and like to be able to continue living at home, or is it a completely different set of rules?
So no, I mean the rules, they are different in a way, but only because they're contained within different acts. That's the main difference. In terms of the underlying principles, they are very, very similar in a way. As I say, the main difference between continuing healthcare and social care is that continuing healthcare can cover more of the healthcare aspect of it rather than just the social care. So it's more of a financial responsibility than an actual direct impact necessarily on care. So if I've forgotten where I was going with this. So yes, so if there is a change between social care and healthcare, then the underlying principles are very much the same. As I say, said before, they have to meet all of those assessed health and social care needs. That's what needs to be included within all of this. So it shouldn't necessarily impact, though you wouldn't get less, it wouldn't necessarily change where the care would be provided necessarily as an underlying principle. The starting point of commissioning any package of care needs to be the individual's wishes and what's in their best interest. That needs to be the starting point of agreeing any package of care within continuing healthcare. So if they want to stay at home, the starting point should be they want to stay at home. And then they obviously have to look at the practicalities of that and making sure that there is a safe and appropriate package to do that. So.
Thank you. Could we get iPad 2? We don't know your name yet.
Marilyn, you've
got a question. You've had your hand up very patiently for a while. So go for it.
Thank you, Pippa. My son has been through the DST on 2 occasions, most recently 2 years ago, and scored 6 highs and whatever else. And I'm sure at some point in the future, we'll go through this process once again. But I'm interested to know, when we look at the law, you have, Chris, mentioned the Coughlan case. Mm-hmm. And following a couple of years after that, there was the Grogan case. Mm-hmm. Yep. And I believe that sent some pieces of law where it became apparent that there was a helpful aspect of understanding the legal limits of what the local authority were able to provide. So if it was that they felt they were not able to provide the support, and what support was needed was beyond their legal limit, it then stepped into that aspect of a full CHC. And there's something around a phrase which is called ancillary and incidental.
Yes.
And I really would like to understand it a little better.
Okay.
So I'd like to know if A was Joe, who was given CHC, because it was ancillary and incidental, and then another person wasn't. What is it that's different?
So what they're looking at, what they're talking about in terms of incidental or ancillary is the healthcare needs. So they're looking at whether or not the healthcare needs are merely incidental or ancillary to the provision of their social care. So that's what they're referring to within that. So I deliberately didn't go into too much detail with that, purely because incidental ancillary is a really difficult way of explaining it and an overly complicated way of explaining it. Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, it raises more questions than it answers. So yeah, absolutely. But yeah, what they're looking at very, very simply is, as I say, are the healthcare needs merely incidental or ancillary to providing, well, it used to say safe accommodation, but more of the social care aspect of it. So once again, it's looking at this difference between healthcare and social care. If the healthcare is merely incidental to a social care package, if you see what I mean, then that person is not eligible for continuing healthcare. If the healthcare needs are more than incidental or ancillary to providing a social care package, well, in those circumstances, the person would be eligible for continuing healthcare. You mentioned the Grogan case, and I'll just touch upon that quickly because I didn't want to devolve into case law or anything like that too much. But yeah, the Grogan case is incredibly important because that identified that there's always a potential gap in the middle where social care funding ends, but healthcare hasn't quite begun. And the Grogan, what's often referred to as the Grogan Gap, and that means that there's a gap between the provisions, and there shouldn't be a gap, and that's what the case was about. But the Grogan case was, I won't go into all the details, but the long and the short of it is that the social care decided that there was a limit on what they could provide, but the NHS hadn't filled that gap. Their criteria was much higher than that, and you ended up with this gap in between where no one was responsible. In those circumstances, there should be as smaller a gap as possible, but in those circumstances, what we've got is joint funded packages of care. So where there isn't a clear distinction between the two is that you might have the healthcare aspects will be funded by health, the social care aspects funded by social. So that's what it's about. So yeah, does that answer your question? Okay.
Well, yes, that is exactly where we are.
Okay, in the Grogan Gap. Okay.
We are absolutely.
Yeah. Okay.
That is an undecided.
Okay.
Thanks, Carolyn. We are nearly out of time, but we've got 3 hands, or we've now got 4 hands up. So if we could do these questions really quickly. So Tash, you've had your hand up for a while. And then I'm going to come to Laura, Geraldine and Janet. And then I'm afraid we're going to have to stop.
Yeah, my name is Tasha. I'm an autistic adult. And just recently, I was given 12 hours of care from PAs every fortnight. And I also have carers coming twice a week as well. But I'm scared that in the future, because of my complex needs, because I've got autism and other complex needs, that's not going to be enough. So how do I progress to get more help? And also, I've had communication problems because there was one time I needed the support of the PAs on the weekend when they wasn't working, even though they said that they were supposed to work around me. And because this stupid PA put friendship, is this as a PA or is this as a friend, they took the care away.
Right, okay.
And so I just want to say I am autistic and I was took on, and I also have an occupational therapist.
Okay. Yeah, so I mean, if needs do increase, then are you funded under continuing healthcare, are you, or is it
Direct payments.
direct payment from the local authority? Yeah. Okay, well, I mean, either under the local authority or under continuing healthcare, if you do have an increase in care needs, then they have a duty to meet that. You know, as I say, you know, that's their legal responsibility to meet all assessed health and social care needs. I mean, that health needs is within CHC, obviously, but yeah, any health and social care needs have to be met. So, I mean, if in the future, you know, needs progressed and you were looking at a CHC assessment, I would always encourage people to go down that route. As I said, there is no major disadvantage of going down that route other than the stress of going through a continuing healthcare assessment. But yeah, other than that, yeah, any needs that you have as they develop need to be assessed. So I would suggest contacting your social worker. Obviously, if you were moving to continuing healthcare, then it would be the appointed care manager. So.
Thank you.
Thanks, Chris.
Okay.
Laura, could we come to you now, please?
Stop it.
Hi. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes, we can hear you.
Sorry, I can't. It's a bit weird. So, if your health needs are taken over by health, sorry, your social care needs are taken over by health, but your social care needs, I think you were explaining this about if they'd already been assessed and then basically health takes it over as well and meets the gap.
Mm-hmm.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Okay. So you would then have to have a separate social care assessment as well?
No. So if someone is eligible for continuing healthcare, that ends social services responsibility at that point, other than safeguarding, which is the exception. So right. any assessments would be any assessments of care needs or anything like that would be done by the CCG at that point.
But what if they are particular to social care?
It's the CCG. If someone's eligible for full continuing healthcare funding, the CCG is responsible for all health and social care needs. So.
Okay, I'm just a bit confused because how would they assess it going forward if it changes?
So if it changes, it would be subject to review. So any changes to the care package would be reviewed. They would look at the care needs, they would look at the care provision, ensure that it's being met appropriately.
But would a health person be qualified to assess that if they are not? So are they aware of the social care statutory duties?
Well, the social care don't have any statutory duties for someone who's under continuing healthcare. They have a responsibility for meeting all needs, whether they're healthcare needs or social care needs at that point.
Right, okay. So if you're covered under the deaf-blind guidance and laws, would the recommendations from your deaf-blind assessment that has to be done by a trained person, MSI trained person, apply? Because when you have the continuing care assessment, that person is not MSI trained and doesn't understand how those needs impact.
Right. Okay. I see what you mean. So
see what I'm getting at?
Yeah, I see what you're so right. I see what you mean now. Yeah, absolutely. So any kind of specialist assessments, you know, whether that be, you know, physio, deafblind, you know, occupational therapists, anything like that, you know, speech and language therapists, they would still use them. They would still use the professionals involved in that to inform the care package and the care going forward. So yeah, so they would seek the view of professionals, and, you know, from other areas as well.
Yeah.
But,
And is it sorry to I'll be really quick. Is that the law like it is the same in an EHCP where they have to take that on board and do it?
Yeah.
Or can they just pick and choose which bits to do?
No, they as I say, it's quite easily summarized in that, you know, any care needs, no matter what they are, any health or social care needs that person has, the CCG has a responsibility for that when that person becomes eligible for continuing healthcare.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
I'll let our LA know. And CCG, I'll let them know.
Yeah. Okay.
Thanks, Laura. Geraldine.
Hi, my other bugbear is personal health budget. Everybody tells me my son should be entitled to a personal health budget. The way things took over from we changed areas, they CHC took on and they did whatever and they paid. Then they said that he would be a good case for a personal health budget. And so when we looked into it, they then said that he needed to agree to it because he had mental capacity, but nobody came to explain anything to him and tell him what was up.
Okay.
They then said, oh, we are no longer doing personal health budgets, when I kept nagging them. And this has been one of my arguments and complaint thing, which didn't work out. And we had his review last March, which should have been November. They then delayed for many months to go to panel.
Okay.
And we eventually got the result from this. And I noticed for the first time I had on this piece of paper thing that how much they were actually paying the provider. And it said their personal health budget to the provider. But that wasn't a personal health budget to my notice. We have at last got Law Stop who are taking up our case now.
Okay.
But I'm just wondering, speaking to you, am I right? And everybody says they can't by law not give him a personal health budget, and that should be through us and talking to him and planning the care we want.
Absolutely. Yeah. Everyone who's eligible for continuing healthcare has the right to.
Because my argument is the team, there's no accountability for the provider to do the training. In 4 years, they've done nothing. I've given them free training they could do, and they haven't done it. And the accountability isn't with CCG. They say we've commissioned the company to do it.
Okay. The CCG, even if the CCG commission a company to do whatever, whatever that may be, they still have the responsibility over that package.
Thank you.
Ensuring
Of
it's
course
safe.
they do.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay.
Thank you very much.
No problem.
Thank you, Geraldine. Janet, and then Soraya.
Thank you. My daughter had a joint package for 3 years from age 18. So there have been a few references to joint packages in this kind of potential gap between the two forms of funding. We then moved to a different part of the country, and I was told we don't do joint packages. So she's been back on social care. We've been through 2 CHC assessments, and and each time they said, oh, it's ever so complex and ever so this, that, and the other. But no, it's not quite a primary health need. I was just wondering, is it widespread, this we don't do?
No. Fortunately, fortunately and unfortunately, I suppose. Yeah, it's fortunately it's not that widespread. I think I saw your question in the chat, and I wanted to come back to that, so I couldn't remember who done it, so who said it. So yeah, absolutely no. Yeah, as I said before, joint packages of care are a responsibility. Absolutely, they should be doing them. If there are aspects of the care which are beyond what the local authority can provide, but that person is not quite eligible for continuing healthcare, that's what the Grogan case was all about. That's the Grogan Gap. It's the difference between, and it's about filling that gap and ensuring that if there are healthcare needs which can't be met by the local authority in a situation where a person might not be eligible for continuing healthcare, that the CCG are paying for those elements that the local authority can't provide. So yes, it shocks me even now. Some aspects of continuing healthcare shock me even now, and I've been doing this for 8 years now, and it still shocks me when I hear these sorts of things. But yeah, that's appalling. Yeah, if you shock me, it must be pretty bad. So yeah. Right. So we if we go through this again at some point when I'm feeling a bit more capable of it, then we can potentially perhaps try to challenge them on saying there are aspects of this that need something more than. Absolutely. Yeah. And in those circumstances, the local authority can be your best friend as well. Because obviously, yes. For obvious reasons, they will also want to not be providing anything which they're not legally responsible for. So yeah. Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Janet. Soraya.
So I just wanted to ask, one of the arguments that we've faced during the assessment was because his needs are being met well, or it's kind of being managed, it means that they're not as severe as we're saying they are. And our argument was, if that support wasn't in place, if that level of staffing wasn't in place, if they weren't doing X, Y, and Z, it would then deteriorate back to the levels we'd seen before. So what should they be taking into account during the assessment? And again, during those reviews, if they're trying to argue, well, they're no longer at that high level, should they be basing it off what the support needs would be if they had none of the support in place, or if it was removed.
Absolutely. Right. Okay. Yeah. Good. Really, really good question, and one we're asked quite a lot, actually. That's that, it is that good a question. My favorite paragraph, which I said before, paragraph 65, is what covers this, very, very clearly. It's not about, the assessment should not be about how well managed the needs are. So when you're assessing someone's care needs, it's not about how brilliantly they're done or not, or otherwise. It's not about the care delivery, it's about the care need. I'm always tempted not to go too far into saying, well, what would happen if the care was removed as such, because that also doesn't necessarily tell you what the needs are. It gives you an idea of the consequences and the reason that the needs are there. But what you need to explain is, well, what are the needs? If something's not a problem anymore, why is that? What is mitigating those risks? What is going into stopping that being a problem? That's what needs to be assessed. So whether or not the care needs are being managed perfectly or not at all is a complete aside when it comes to a continuing healthcare assessment. It's about what the care needs are. The way I suggest people think about it in a slightly different way, a bit more tangible, I suppose, than a continuing healthcare assessment, is that, say for instance, the care, rather than saying, well, what would happen if the care was removed, think about it in a way such as, okay, if the care provider was to change, if the person were to move to a different care provider, a different care setting, what would that care provider need to know? What would the new care provider need to know to understand those care needs? What exactly are the care needs? What would they need to know so they could deliver the safe and appropriate care? That's what the needs are. So that's just a different way of thinking about it.
And the last part of the question was, when calculating, when they first put the package together, is it kind of based on the number of hours of care a person might need, or is it generally kind of like a notational, like a set budget, and you've then got to use that to fit? So we're asking because any agencies we found, the hourly rate is quite different to what the hourly rate has been set up, or the budget.
The budget needs to be based on a realistic cost of what it is to provide that care for that person in that area. So the starting point for a budget could be, a package, but it would have to be a realistic package. It would have to be a care provider that was willing to take on that care, was qualified to do so, had the availability and everything, and how much that would cost. So that would be the starting point of any budget, really, is what is realistically does it cost, and this is a problem we see with personal health budgets a lot of the time, is that they will set kind of an arbitrary kind of capped budget, for instance. So I'm dealing with an ongoing case here, and it's I won't break any confidences by telling you this, because it's anonymous, but I'm dealing with an ongoing case at the moment where someone is expecting to find a personal assistant doing complex waking night care in central London for £12 an hour. I don't think you could get someone to wash dishes in London for £12 an hour at the moment. It's insane. That's not a reasonable budget. So a reasonable budget needs to be on the basis of what is the actual cost of providing that care for that person, for that individual person, not an assumed cost in that area based on market rates, and market rates fluctuate, so it needs to be updated.
Thank you.
Does that answer your question?
I'm just going to go to a last question, Chris, if that's okay.
Yeah, that's
and
fine.
This is another one that was in the chat from Madeline. Would you like to talk to it, Madeline? It was about epileptic seizures which are controlled, but there are side effects of the drugs. Madeline.
It's actually my husband.
Okay.
Quick stage.
Madeline's husband.
Madeline. I'm now Madeline for the day. Yeah, that was your treat for sitting through the whole thing. Okay, sorry. So to be quick then, I think to a certain degree, so we've been through a couple of DSTs, we think, probably over the last couple of years now. And we assume that once they get to CCG, something happens, and the dark art of whatever happens usually ends up with, no, your daughter is actually not eligible, or she didn't quite make the mark, or yes, actually you fit in that gap, so we'll part fund it. And I think to a certain extent, and maybe others may have feel the same when they've been through it, it's almost as though we kind of score our own goals on this in terms of, so my daughter's got very complex epilepsy. She's severe learning difficulties. It affects her mobility. Although she can walk, she walks as if she's had about 16 gins and about 14 vodkas, because there's also, quite a lot of, quite a cocktail of epileptic medicines that she also has to take. But you could say when you wrap the care package that we've currently got through social care, that is generally managed. And I think to a certain extent, we kind of go along with that. Is, oh, well, yeah, maybe, with the fact it's managed and the fact that she doesn't have the seizures is one thing. But the thing is about seizures, there are the ones you see with your eyes, and then there's the ones you see with diagnostic tools. So when you put the diagnostic tools in play, what you actually see is a brainwave pattern that is totally disrupted with no normal background activity. But you won't necessarily see the seizures because the drugs and the VNS that she's got is actually controlling the seizures. But it does have a knock-on effect with her mobility, and she can bump into things, she can stagger, she can fall. But we tend to go along with it. Now, for me, that's a Stonewall medical. Sorry, what's the phrase? It's a health need. It's an absolute health need. But we kind of almost devalue it ourselves by saying, but she's controlled, and they say, okay, so it's not severe then. And then there you go. Suddenly you're starting to come down the scale quite quickly. Yeah. Does that make sense? Sorry.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I think in those cases, they often take a little bit of unpicking. So I probably can't give you an absolute definitive answer here and now. And I wouldn't want to give you the wrong answer, if you see what I mean. Feel free to, I'm just as we finish, I'm going to put our contact details on it. So if any of you want to contact us and speak to us in more detail about your individual cases, by all means do.
Sorry to interrupt, but that gentleman could have been describing my son, and we have continuing health care.
I think the thing is with us is the social workers ask for continuing health care and we go all through it. It's rejected, and then they start again the following day. They start the whole thing,
Right.
So, and this is just an ongoing thing.
I'm sorry to interrupt. I just wanted to give you the confidence to go ahead, because you could be describing my son. He has the VNS. I call them internal seizures that only are diagnostically you can see, and we have it. So continue to fight, because you will.
Thank you. Thank you. Appreciate that.
Sorry.
Thanks for the intervention. No, it was well received. Well received.
Yeah. No, absolutely. Well, I mean, yeah. There's inconsistency in application of criteria for you right there. There's example A, isn't there? So, yeah, absolutely. Yes. I mean, in terms of kind of particular care needs, in terms of things such as different altered states of consciousness, such as seizure and things like that. It often comes down to how it needs to be managed, and it sounds like I'm playing devil's advocate here, but I kind of have to a little bit, unfortunately. But it comes down to what do those seizures mean for the ongoing care needs? How does that need to be managed? Now, if it can be managed through medication effectively, if that effectively stops the seizure, that's the care need, and that's what they need to be assessing. I'm not going to say whether that's a healthcare need or a social care need. Obviously, as I say, it's a little bit difficult to say without, we could talk for another 2 hours, just us, and probably not get to the bottom of it still. But I think it's important to remember how is the care being met? What care needs are meeting those needs? How is it managing those risks? And if it's done through medication, then yeah, that might be the care need. The care need is the medication. But what you said there is the impact that medication then goes on to have on other areas, such as mobility. That's a need in itself, and that's a prime example of complexity, which is what we were talking about, is that it's one care need being met, having a negative impact on another aspect of care, and that can make the care need overall more complex and more of a healthcare need for that matter. So, yeah.
Okay, that was helpful. Thank you very much. And thanks for the intervention. That was great. Thanks.
That's good.
Thank you so much, Chris and Joe. Thank you everyone for coming. We can send out your contact details, Chris.
That's fine.
I'll email everyone who's been.
I will send you an email with everything on tomorrow morning. I'm not going to do it tonight, if that's okay. And I'll send it first thing tomorrow morning when I start work at 9 o'clock. So that's fine. So
Thank you all so much for coming. And as I think has been said in the chat, I think Katie put something in the chat. We're aware that we've run late. We haven't answered all the questions. There's a sense that people would really enjoy some more discussion. So we will do our very best to do something in the new year at some point, and we'll come back to this topic and have some discussion and go through these questions. So thank you all very much, Katie.
Thank you.
Pippa, just quickly, do you want to just mention the social care as well? We've got social care events coming up in January.
Yes, I'll email everyone about all that. Yeah. So we'll be in touch. Thank you so much, everyone.
And Merry Christmas.
Yes, Merry Christmas, everyone.
Thank you, you too. Thank you for inviting us.
All right then, take care, everyone.
Thank you.
Cheers.
Bye.
Bye.
We'll stay on, Chris, and
okay,
just
okay.
a debrief.
All right then.
Thanks,
all right, then.
everybody.
Cheers. Bye.
Bye, Claire. Bye, Anna.
Bye, Claire.
Bye, Janet.
Bye.
Hi, Francis. And bye, Francis. Oh. Sarah, do you want to stay on as well? Yeah, I've got all the chat. I'll do something with the chat.
Yeah, I'm here. I'll hang on.
So, sorry, Katie, just to be clear, did you want us to stay on as well? Is that
just to debrief and thank you?
Fine.
And if there's anything,
no, that's fine. No problem. Yeah.
Sarah's part of our team.
Yeah, that's fine.
Carolyn, are you stuck?
Stuck? No.
Stuck in.
I'm going to stay on, and if that's possible for the debrief.
Okay, we're just going to go through some practicalities. Chris, we've been asked just at the end here about if we could share your presentation. I know this has been recorded, but I also know we didn't. We missed a bit of the end.
We missed quite a bit of the second half. Yeah, absolutely. So yeah.
So could you email that through?
Yeah, that's fine. I'll email copies of that over to you. That's absolutely fine. So yeah, no problem. So
how did you find it, Chris and Joe?
Yeah, it was okay. I'm sorry it ran so long. It was it's a new presentation for us, you see. So I've been working on it the last few days, and I thought there's lots of topics to cover within continuing healthcare, unfortunately, and I know we have like a wide gamut of people that wanted to be involved, people at different stages, so I want to kind of cover it all. I think we covered most of it with the questions though, but as I say, I think we can share a lot of the literature as well, which will be useful for people as well. So, but no, it was fine. It was nice.
Not it really isn't an easy subject to simplify, which is partly why we have the tier 2 consultations available. So any of your people could actually book tier 2 consultations if they got something difficult to unpick, but that's the difficulty of it, really, is you can't simplify it because you have to know the detail to work your way through it and sort of get the results you hope for.
It's true. It's one of the kind of eternal problems with advising on continuing healthcare. Either you make it so specific that it goes on for hours and hours and hours, or you make it so broad that it's not particularly useful. So it's kind of addressing that balance really in between. So we tried to strike the balance there a little bit. But
and I think it was the balance that people really liked the information. Some people it would have gone over their heads, but for some and then everybody likes the questions. So it's all our sessions, it's trying to balance that, because sometimes we just have it open where we just share experiences and come together and people find solutions to each other's problems. And then it did strike a balance with
good.
Thank you. And it's not easy coming on an evening with people that also people that you're not familiar with on a very
No, it's fine. Well, like I said, Joe and I were talking about this beforehand, but it's what we do anyway. So we deal with the tier 2 consultations within Beacon, between us, and every day we speak to individuals who we've never met before, and they give us absolutely all the detail in the world, and we have to unpick it and kind of give the best advice we can. So it's a part of the course. Don't do 37 at a time normally, but you know, that's fine. It's absolutely fine. You know,
it was very popular.
Good. I'm glad. Yeah. Well, yeah, like I say, it's, you know, I know it's a bit of a dry subject. You know, I know it's not particularly. But
it's really difficult when you're going through it.
Yeah, exactly.
It's really hard.
Yeah, exactly.
It's that.
A lot of the interest comes from the personal relevance, and that's where it comes from. Isn't it? So,
and I think, you know, however much we manage to get through or not get through, I think, you know, one of the things that's going to be good from this is that now you know, everyone has access to Beacon. If it's something simple, the helpline can deal with it. If someone wants to come through and unpick what's happening in their personal health budget, you know, they can book a tier 2 appointment.
Yeah. So we're happy to continue to offer that support. As I say, you know, that's part of our free information and advice service. So yeah, that's absolutely fine. So if anyone needs anything, you know, including yourselves as well, you know, that's absolutely fine. You know, we often speak to kind of more of the professional side, you know, so, you know, we speak to social workers, we speak to nurses, you know, care home managers and things like that on a regular basis as well. So, you know, even if you're wanting kind of a more broader conversation, you know, that's fine. Give us a call. We can get a time booked in. So
we will be in touch, Chris. That is for sure.
We're going to have 37 tier 2 appointments.
Yes, we are. We're going to be booked. Yeah, I can see us booked up until March now, Joe. So.
Yeah, we don't work on Christmas Day, I'm afraid.
No, we don't work on Christmas Day. We're allowed one day off for you.
The feedback's great. Somebody's just messaged me now saying that was fab, really helpful.
Good.
So the feedback's really good, and we'll share that with you.
Yeah, good.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much for coming on an evening and fitting in with us all.
No problem at all. That's absolutely fine. My pleasure. So yeah, hope you all enjoyed it and found it useful. But yeah, as I say, I'll send through. Do you want me to send the details to you, Pippa?